Imagine this. Think back, way back, to a time when a spiritual teacher might stand up and say really boldly, my way, it's the only way. Not just, a good path, but the one path to genuine freedom. Well, it's quite a statement, isn't it? Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping headfirst into exactly that kind of text. It's from the Pali Canon, called the Cūḷasīhanādasuttaṃ. That translates to the shorter discourse on the lion's roar. And it really gives us this fascinating look into how one path laid out its claim with such confidence, how it set itself apart. So our mission today, we want to understand what gives this lion's roar its power. How does it draw these really clear lines for achieving liberation based on what the text actually says? We're going to unpack its main points, the arguments, the sort of detailed thinking behind it so you can really get a handle on it. Okay, so let's get into the lion's roar itself. At its heart, it's this pretty direct instruction the Buddha gives his monks.
He basically tells them, go out and say this loud and clear. Here alone is a true spiritual practitioner. Here's a second, a third, a fourth, other teachings. They're empty of genuine practitioners. I mean, wow, that's not exactly whispering sweet nothings, is it? It's a roar. A really strong assertion. How does Israel even begin to back that up, especially with other spiritual folks around?
That's the perfect question to start with. And what's really interesting, I think, is how the sutta itself anticipates that exact challenge. It sets up the questions someone like you listening and comparing would naturally ask. It mentions these other wanderers. The Pali term is anyatitya paribhajaka. And it knows they'd say, hey, wait a minute. We also have faith in our teacher. We believe in our doctrine. We follow our ethics. We support each other. So the unspoken question hangs there. If we all claim these foundations, faith, conduct, community, what makes your path so special? Or, supposedly superior, it's a brilliant setup for the main argument.
Ah, okay. So it anticipates the we have faith too argument. And that leads to the core distinction, right? Which seems to be about the actual goal, the nutha. The sutta tells the monks to push back, to ask, okay, this final goal you're aiming for, is it one goal for everyone, or are there different goals? And the text suggests, if they're honest, they'd have to say it's one. And then it gets really specific. It lays out these diagnostic questions defining that single goal, always contrasting the liberated state with its opposite. Things like, is the goal for someone free from passion or someone with passion?
Exactly. And it continues down the list. Is it for someone free from hatred or with hatred? Free from delusion or with delusion? Vidamahasa versus samahasa.
Free from craving or with craving. Free from clinging or with clinging.
Right. And then is it for someone who is discerning, who truly sees, or someone who is, undiscerning, ignorant? Vidasuno versus abidasuno. And another really key pair. Is it for someone unattached and unopposed, or someone caught in attachment and opposition?
And that last one you mentioned before, about proliferation.
Yes, Papanyaka. Is the goal for someone who does not delight in mental proliferation, in all that conceptual elaboration, or someone who does? Nipapani karma versus Papanyaka.
For every single one of these pairs, the text makes it clear. The real goal, the liberated state, is always the one that's free from, the one that's non-delighting. It's incredibly precise.
It is. It's like a spiritual litmus test, as you said earlier. It leaves very little room for ambiguity about what genuine liberation looks like, according to this teaching.
Okay, so that defines the goal. What prevents people from getting there then? So you said talks about views, right?
Yes, it drills down into what it sees as fundamental misunderstandings. It highlights two main wrong views, or dietyo. First, there's the view of existence pavati. This is basically clinging to the idea that there's some permanent you that continues on, an eternal self. And second, there's the opposite view, the view of non-existence of pavati, that's clinging to the idea that at death, everything is just utterly wiped out, annihilated.
So holding on to either permanence or nothingness is seen as a problem.
Exactly. The sutta argues that these are deep misunderstandings of how things actually are. And if you don't truly grasp, where these views come from, how they stop, what's good about them, initially perhaps, what the danger is and how to escape them, then you're still stuck. You're bound by passion, hatred, delusion, craving, clinging, ignorance, all those things we just listed. You're caught in the cycle of, suffering, birth, aging, death, sorrow, pain, grief, despair.
But if you do understand them properly,
then the text says you're free. You're liberated from those defilements, liberated from that whole cycle. It really hinges on understanding these fundamental views correctly. It's not just about having faith. It's about having the right understanding.
Okay, that makes sense. Understand the wrong views to get free. But then it gets even more specific with the 4 kinds of clinging, the upādāna. This feels like the real heart of the sutta's test.
It really is presented as the ultimate differentiator. So these 4 are clinging to sensual pleasures, upādāna, clinging to views,
The upādāna.
which we just talked about. Sort of, yes, but this is clinging to views in general, including the right ones if held rigidly. Then clinging to rites and rituals, upādāna, and finally, the big one, clinging to a doctrine of self, attavadupādāna.
The self thing again. So how does this become the test?
Well, the sutta says, look, other teachers, other recluses and brahmins, they might claim to understand clinging, and maybe they do, up to a point. Perhaps they teach letting go of sensual pleasures, maybe even letting go of attachment to rituals or certain views. They might address 1, 2, or even 3 of these clingings. But the text argues they consistently fail to fully grasp and therefore fully teach the abandoning of that 4th one, the clinging to a doctrine of self.
So that's the gap. Even if they get the other stuff right, if they miss the self piece, their path is considered incomplete.
According to this discourse, yes. That incomplete understanding, specifically around the subtle idea of a permanent self, means their whole system, their faith in the teacher, the doctrine, the practices, is not rightly gone. It doesn't lead to the final complete liberation.
Whereas the Buddha, the Tathāgata,
The Tathāgata, the sutta proclaims, fully understands and teaches the abandoning of all 4 types of clinging, especially the clinging related to self. And that complete understanding is what validates the path, makes the lion's roar possible, and leads to real freedom.
So understanding and letting go of that sense of a fixed self is absolutely crucial.
It's presented as the non-negotiable key, and this naturally leads into how this clinging arises in the first place. The sutta doesn't just point out the problem, it maps the cause.
Right, the dependent origination part, tracing it all back.
Exactly. It's a powerful causal explanation. It shows how these 4 clingings we just discussed, they don't just appear out of nowhere, they are rooted in craving, in tancha.
Okay, clinging comes from craving. Where does craving come from?
Craving arises from feeling, from vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations.
And feeling.
Feeling arises from contact, phassa, the meeting of our senses with objects, eye and form, ear and sound, mind and thought, and so on.
Okay, contact comes from...
Contact depends on the 6 sense bases, sakayatana, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind.
Sense spaces depend on.
They depend on name and form, namarupa. Form is the physical body, and name covers the mental aspects like feeling, perception, intention, contact, attention.
Name and form depends on. Keep going.
Name and form arises from consciousness, viññāja, the basic awareness that distinguishes phenomena.
Consciousness depends on.
Consciousness arises from volitional formations, sakkara. These are the mental impulses, the intentions, the karma-forming actions.
And finally, the volitional formations. Where did they come from? What's the ultimate root?
They arise from ignorance, avijjā, not understanding the true nature of reality, particularly the 4 noble truths and how this whole process works.
Wow. So it all traces back to a fundamental lack of understanding. Ignorance.
Precisely. It maps the entire structure of suffering, showing its deep roots in ignorance. And therefore, the path to liberation becomes crystal clear. When ignorance is abandoned, when true knowledge arises, what happens? You no longer form those volitional formations in the same way. Consciousness doesn't land in a way that creates suffering. Name and form, sense spaces, contact, feeling, craving.
The whole chain unravels.
The whole chain ceases. You no longer cling. You're not agitated. You attain Nibbana, final liberation, right here and now. And that leads to that ultimate declaration you hear in the texts. Birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What was to be done has been done. There is no more returning to any state of being. The cycle is broken.
It's such a comprehensive picture. From the bold claim, the roar, all the way down to the root cause and ignorance and the path out through understanding.
It really is. It connects the confidence of the teaching directly to its depth of analysis.
So let's just quickly recap. The lion's roar isn't just, shouting loudest. It's presented as this detailed, systematic breakdown of what true liberation actually entails. Defining the goal precisely, identifying the wrong views that block it, pinpointing the crucial role of clinging, especially to self, and then tracing the entire arising of suffering back to ignorance via dependent origination.
Exactly. It contrasts this comprehensive approach with paths that, from its perspective, might address some issues but ultimately fall short because they don't tackle that fundamental clinging to self and the ignorance that fuels it all.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a provocative one for you listening. This ancient sutta suggests that while many paths can offer real comfort, maybe a sense of meaning or ethical guidance, Real radical freedom, the kind it's talking about, requires dismantling even our most subtle attachments, especially to this idea of self and cutting through ignorance itself. So the question becomes, what does this ancient framework, this emphasis on deep understanding and non-clinging, mean for how we look at knowledge, transformation, and maybe even different paths today? Something to definitely chew on.